Hello, welcome to the Fantastic Fiction at KGB reading series. Fantastic Fiction is a monthly speculative fiction reading series held on the third Wednesday of every month, hosted by Ellen Datlow and me, Matthew Kressel. We spotlight well-known and up-and-coming science fiction, fantasy, and horror authors, and admission is always free. We publish a monthly podcast and video so people who can't attend the in-person event can still enjoy the readings. If you'd like to support the series, you can donate at kgbfantasticfiction.org/support. Anyway, on to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. This is Fantastic Fiction at KGB. I'm Matt Kressel, and I co-host the series here with Ellen Datlow, and this is our second month doing it in person after an 18-month hiatus of doing it virtually, which I have to say was really great because we were able to get people from all over the globe. But it's also really great to see everyone in person. Like, I'm seeing people tonight that I haven't seen in, maybe 2 years. It is amazing. I love you guys, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on my third beverage. Speaking of beverages, the KGB bar always hosts us free of charge. All they ask is that you buy a drink, hard or soft. Please buy drinks and tip your bartender, who is working hard. Kelly is working hard to keep all of you hydrated, so please buy drinks. I am just really happy to be here, honestly. Both of the readers tonight are some of my good friends and great writers, and I know you're going to enjoy their readings this evening. So our readers tonight are C.S.E. Cooney and Robert V.S. Redick. So thank you so much for joining us. What else? Do we have any other announcements? I always feel like there's all these announcements, but I can't remember a single one. So I guess they're not that important. All right. Oh yeah. So the way it works, if you've forgotten, I know it's been a long time. We've all been sitting in our PJs for 2 years. We have a reader that reads the first reader will read for 20 minutes, and we take about a 10-minute break. Everyone gets a drink, and then we have the second reader, and then this is something new. We're doing Q&As now. So we're gonna, if you have questions that you'd like to ask the authors, you can think of them, and we do an audio podcast of the reading. So we're gonna try to get the questions on the microphone. So we haven't quite worked out logistics of that yet. So we may just have to repeat the questions into the mic. But yeah. All right, let's get started. Our first reader is Robert V.S. Redick. Robert is a novelist, teacher, editor, and international development consultant with 30 years' experience in the Neotropics and Southeast Asia. He's the author of 7 novels, including The Red Wolf Conspiracy and the Fire Sacraments epic fantasy trilogy. His most recent novel, Sidewinders, was first published in July. He won the new Millennium Writings Award and was a finalist for the Thomas Dunne Novel Award. He lives with his partner, Dr. Kiran Asher, in Western Massachusetts. Here's Robert. And Robert also has books for sale.
Advertising books for sale.
Hello there. Oh, that's the lamp. Hello there.
That's a lamp.
Yeah. I'm really, really, really happy to be here. It's a little bewildering to be doing anything in real life, in the flesh, and instead of just, a projection of myself.
Speak into the microphone.
And it's my first time ever stepping into the KGB. I'm just very, very happy and really honored to be here reading with Claire. And I'm happy. We've all been walking a really hard road, and just got to keep walking, don't we? So I am 2 books into this crazy, long, anti-war, war story epic fantasy trilogy called the Fire Sacraments. And I have these friends, Kandri and Mektu Hinjaman, who, I don't know if you've got any friends like this, the kind that, you hear a knock on the door, and you open the door, and there's this person who's, you're definitely close to, you definitely feel kind of intimate with, but you're not actually sure you want to invite them in, but they don't stop and wait. They're while you're still thinking about whether to make an excuse, like I'm really busy now or something, they're already in the door. They're into your kitchen, they're opening the cabinets and looking for snacks and so on. That's kind of what happened with Condry and Mektu Hingeman, the Hingeman brothers. I had all these ideas. I basically knew that I wanted to write an epic fantasy that stuck with poor people. And yeah, they fit the bill, but they muscled in and sort of took over, and I've become really close to them. We are at this point, as I'm writing book 3 in the series. Book 2, Sidewinders, came out in July, but I'm writing book 3, and there's really no point at all in trying to bring you up to speed on about 1,400 pages of story at this point. And that's always the frustrating thing about when you're in the middle of an epic fantasy and somebody says, how about you read? You can either just give context that goes on and on and on and on, everybody's eyes are glazing over, or you can lose people, or you just read from the beginning of a story. And so that's what I tend to do. The last time I was in New York, exactly 2 years ago at the New York Review of Science Fiction readings, I read from the beginning of Sidewinders, and it was completely raw, and I was terrified like now, and it went okay, so I thought I'd just do that again, and it seemed to be faded even more because this particular, or most of what I'm going to read, it takes place in not quite a bar, but a boarding house, so a public house. And so I'm just reading from the very, very beginning of book 3, which is called Siege. And really all you need to know is these brothers I mentioned, they are peasant soldiers drafted into a horrible religious war they never wanted any part of. They got on the wrong side of just about everybody, and particularly their own people's sort of liberation hero / prophet / queen. And to not be summarily executed, they fled into the desert. There's a desert in this world that's about twice the width of the Sahara, and they're running on foot, and they come into possession, and I did write this long before COVID came on the scene, but they're in the possession of a letter which, if it's ever deciphered, may cure a plague that's been hobbling and hurting the world for 300 years. And for all of the first 2 books, the saga of not just dying in this desert has been sort of the background danger. They have now, at this point, walked 97% of the way across this desert. Their destination is a city called Casrales, and I promise you there are very few made-up names you have to keep track of here. This city called Casrales, which is like the last little cooling ember of an empire that once dominated the whole of this continent of Urath, and it's never been conquered. It's 3,000 years old. Its traditions, its science, its knowledge, its universities, its libraries, none of them were ever burned, and they believe that if they can get the letter in the walls of Casrales, maybe it can be interpreted, and maybe this terrible burden of the plague can come to an end. But there's plot upon plot upon plot, and people don't want this to happen. So all along for the first 2 books, they've been hunted by death squads from their own people's Messiah, and her servants, which include a very small, like a little white demon who looks like a young girl. So I'm trying to think. Those are about the only references that you really need to know. But along the way, they have allies, they have enemies, and when people come to realize that they are carrying this unbelievably precious letter with them that could end the plague, some people try to help them, and one of them is a sort of a guerrilla general who's been in the shadows fighting for his people's liberation for 40 years. And he sends 9 of his best soldiers to be their bodyguards as they walk across the desert. And at this point, as I said, they're almost there. They haven't quite made it to the city of Casrales as the previous book closes, and so we have these 9 hardened, battle-weary, always poor, always on the edge, always sort of underground soldiers who've been taking care of the brothers forever. And right at the end of the last book, the brothers kind of pull a dirty trick and ditch everyone. But among the 9 soldiers, there's a character who's been there from the beginning, who's never had a chance to have her own voice. And her name is Talupeke. She's a child soldier, was sort of forced into all this fighting very, very young. And she's always been there. She's always intrigued me, and I've never kind of given her the time I wanted to. So I decided I would start this book off from her point of view. And so I'm just going to read you a little bit from Talupeke. Before I get there, there's about a half a page preface, because so this third final book is called Siege, and you can imagine what happens to the poor city of Casrales with a title like that. But so there's just like this half a page that starts off the book, and it's from somebody we haven't identified yet, who's writing a travel guide. And I if my editor permits me, the subtitle of this book is going to be A Traveler's Guide to the Doomed Republic. So Siege, or A Traveler's Guide to the Doomed Republic, preface. Here we go. Listen, reader, I have come to propose an armistice. You who hold this book are a mystery to me. I who scribble the nights away beneath a yellow taper am a mystery to you. What is to be done? In my youth, the midnight ferry thumped and thundered across a black, heaving bay, and from my frosted window I watched the lanterns on boats I could not see, until the ferry crossing in the opposite direction loomed sudden from the darkness, and the horns blasted like the groans of titan lizards about to clash, and for an instant a spray-slicked window glowed with a face turned to mine, eyes locked through sheets of glass and 20 yards of storm, and perhaps there was time for a smile or a lifted eyebrow, and the boats plowed on. Such are we. The gulf between us is greater still, however, for I am denied even that storm glance, that splinter of certainty. You live, you eat and breathe and sleep and dream of happiness, and sometimes your dreams are bound in books. I am dead and my travels forgotten, my family sundered, my causes moot, my passions dissolved into ether, my books gnawed by worms and rodents, my diction antiquated, my sentences overlong. But together we can defy infinity. I will tell you of the siege as though over coffee, as though to a friend close enough to bear my eccentricities. I shall not lie, I shall not sanitize. And you, if you walk with me, shall hear of the doom that came for Casrales and the breaking and remaking of the world. For I knew them all, you see, the mad prophet and her venomous offspring, the tortured general marching on those he did not wish to fight, the brilliant young chancellor whose people plugged their ears to her warnings, the inventor, the doctor, the child soldier, the ghost, the spy who pounced on this land of Urath after a secret journey from the north, and of course the brothers Hingeman, those artists of catastrophe, those peasants who confounded kings. Let us go and find them. Nothing save my candle is burning at the moment, but that is mere good luck. It's never safe to leave those two unattended. Okay, so that's the preface. And you see there's a little reference to a child soldier there, and now now we're, for the first time in 3 books, we get to spend some time with the child soldier. And so this little section is called From the Autobiography of Talupeke, Orolokichu Uluk Alamad Uk Itri, or Tal for short. And here she goes. And you would know this probably, even from the dust jacket or whatever, but she's 17 at the time of writing. So I said yes. That's what you say when the tricky bastards stomp all over your no. And of course that's what my mind was screaming, no, no, hell no, I will never. But I said yes, and I meant yes, and Uncle can take his wondering out loud if my word is any good and hide it way up his... And I should have told you one other thing. So of the 9 soldiers I mentioned, so she's one, obviously, and so is her uncle, and so is her grandmother. And typographically here, she tends to like get really nervous and interrupt herself, and like break off what she's saying, and I'll just try to convey that when I'm reading by awkward pauses. Okay. So an uncle can take his wondering out loud if my word is any good and hide it way up his... Anyway, what about her word is my question. You were there, Uncle. You heard what she promised. Gran sitting there, gasping and weak, and that spear arm of hers that could skewer a boar at 50 feet, just an old woman's now, and her skin dull and eyes shrunk to gray puddles, saying, "Do it, granddaughter. Do it, and I will keep fighting. Each day you write in that notebook is a day I will bite down on this weariness and struggle to live." Which is to say, blackmail. My own Gran is not above it, and Uncle Stilts, the smuggled weasel, sits back crossing his arms. "Shake on it," he says. This at the big common table in the boarding house, and Uncle and Prince Niraba and old Chindalan and the soldiers and even the boy who wipes the tables are watching me, waiting for my yes. But Gran, she won't shake hands. She won't settle for winning if she can skin you like a hare. 3 pages by breakfast, she says. 3 more before you sleep. That's a lot of fucking pages, I say, shrill, like I'm panicked. And Uncle says he knows I'm literate, schooled with words and such, because after Daddy drank poison, he paid the tutors himself. You've been plotting like criminals, is what I tell them. They laugh. The whole room laughs. It's one big, sick, laughing mouth. I'm not laughing or smiling. I say, you're both fucking nuts. 6 pages, that's not human. I'll lose them. They'll blow away in the wind. Then Uncle takes something out from under the table and wipes the breadcrumbs and date pits to the floor, and it sets the something down gentle as a Sartaff's jewels. It's a little bundle in white canvas, and when I unfold it, there's a gleam of steel, and I think, dagger. But it's not. It's a pen. I'm disappointed, of course, but pick it up all the same. Not like that, snaps my uncle. "Ha, girl, that's a tool for writing, not shoveling food into your mouth." He slides it between my fingers the way the tutors did when I was little. And it's true, the hand remembers. Just like a knife, the pen feels like it belongs there. Now I notice it's fucking beautiful. Black wood that's also red somehow, and a band of silver around the cap. Uncle's explaining how he bought it from a man in the gardens, and how I have to coax it gently across the page, and how if you twist just so, you'll draw ink up into a chamber made from the hollow leg bone of a quail. A quail? "A kind of bird," says old Chindalan. Of course I know what a quail is. I'm not that kind of stupid. I also know this is serious, that I have to stop these people now. "I can't write," I say, like I'm sorry. "That's a bald fib, Talupeke," says my Gran. "You wrote a card for my 60th birthday." "I did not. I can't write." "You wrote some filthy words on a cold window," says old Chindalan. "And you wrote my death letter out for me, sister," says a cheeky private, grinning like an ape. "Remember my just-in-case letter, what they should tell my dad and my sweetheart back home if I'm dead?" Gran looks at him and nods. "Thank you, Private Bonry." Bonry's so proud he could split down the middle. I flash my teeth at him. "You should know better. When did I ever like to lose?" "Your letter's rubbish," I tell him. He frowns at me, thinking hard. "You mean it says something else?" "I mean it's chicken scratch, fool. I just did that to make you feel good. Like I said, I can't write." Uncle's laughing. I could kick him. "You wrote the general when you were 6 years old, girl," he says. "You told him you weren't afraid to sleep at night because he was out in the hard places fighting for our people. You said one day you'd pick up a sword and join him, but you could already sew patches and that you'd mend his shirts. Our whole battalion heard that letter. Reduced grown men to tears." Well, now I'm plain pissed furious, standing up from the table, shouting, "You had no right." "The general read it out himself," says Gran. "And your words inspired them, you see." "I didn't write that shit." Uncle's smirking. "Then who did?" "The tutors. Your tutors, because I let them feel me up." "Feel you up?" "Yeah." "Who, that deaf old schoolmistress?" "Exactly. And the chemist with the little dog who lifted his legs on." "They were sick. They took advantage. They said you'd hate me if I talked." Well, Gran and Uncle are hammer-smacked. They look at each other and I can almost hear their thoughts. Maybe that's when it started. Tal's craziness, her cussing, her cutting, fighting, screaming, rage. Oh my, but they're ready to shit themselves. Feel her up. Why didn't we ask her? Why didn't we suspect? So I almost win the day, but this is me, of course, so at the last possible moment I fuck it right up. I'm looking pleased with myself, and they notice, and for a few blinks, they're not old anymore. I see the lions in them I used to fear and love and imitate. That's when it started, if you care to know, when I was 6 or 8 years old and saw them as they truly were, fanged and strong and quiet in the high grass and all that power I wanted for myself. They get the truth out of me together. We shake hands, Gran and I. All the same, I can't write. You can see that for yourself. No, I can't fucking write. I'm a soldier, killer, knife thrower, shit for brains. And also, fuck, they said no curse words in this notebook, and I said yes to that too. That's fine. I have practiced not cursing. If I cursed on patrol, Captain Utarif would come down on me like a savage godsend, like a wolf. All right, let's play school then. Here are 10 facts about me. Or at least 2. Or just 1 to start out with. Are you up to this mission, soldier, or will you fail us again like you fail us again and your Gran as well? Can we trust you to count up to 1? I'm missing war, and how's that for crazy? You think a girl who started fighting before she even bled? No, cut that out. What I mean to say is if you're just 13 and have the bad luck to be there, get chosen for the cause, flung into war like a bone in the soup kettle, I should use more commas. I'll fill this notebook like I promised, but they're not reading a word. I'll show them the pages upside down. Write what you're living and feeling. Uncle says that's how to start. You think that makes it easy? What do you know, Uncle? You sit scribbling for weeks. Living, feeling. Fine, it's rubbish, but you win. I'm living in this boarding house full of flies and mice and cheeky bastards in a beautiful damned oasis called the Font of Luprise. We're trapped here. Not by troops or padlocks, but by heat. 9 full days march from here to the mountains at the desert's edge. And if we went right now today, then with the God's own luck, some of us would make it to the mountains alive. Some, but not my grandmother. Some, but not our sickly prince. Some, but not the elders of the caravan, the men and women who brewed the tea each morning and tended the camels each night. They're called Mistajavs. They finally told us. Just scabby peasants to look at, but they're so much weirder underneath. They eat mice. They talk to their pillows. They think toads are their ancestors and call down prayers to a toad spirit at the bottom of every well. Uncle says to treat each one of them like a king or queen because if I live to be 100 and visit every land in Urath, I'll never see their like again. A clan with no homeland, not even one they've forgotten. A clan so private they won't tell their names unless you marry their brother or one of them falls dead at your feet. A clan so quiet nobody conquered it, nobody changed it. Nobody noticed it dying off the face of the earth. They know their elders wouldn't make it out of the desert this time of year, and so if the caravan master says, pack up, we're marching, I hope the Mistajovs would refuse. But my guess is they'd go with us anyway, not complaining, and after 2 or 3 scalding days, the elders would begin to smile their apologies and step out of everyone's way and sit down quietly to die. So maybe we leave the elders here. Maybe we leave my grandmother and Uncle Stilts to care for her. Uncle is younger and would probably live if we set out tomorrow, but each day the trap's teeth are closing, the summer's begun, and soon the teeth will snap together and we'll be stuck, nailed down in this pretty cage until autumn when the heat starts to lift. The Font of Luprise. I remember a book with pictures of this place, the lemon groves and the fountains and the girls in red sarongs. Also, Daddy smiling his wicked smile like it was a place not to talk about with children. Was it a real place? Who cared? I would never travel, never see lands this side of the desert, any more than I'd walk the twilight meadow on the mountain of the gods under stars that never set. But miracles happen. We stepped into that desert on one side of Urath and walked forever and then forever again, and there were storms and wasps and lumps of burning iron that fell from the clouds, and my comrades died, and the Mistajovs died, and our camels died, and still no one was even whispering halfway. And we walked on and fought those painted lunatics called the Slaughterhouse Clowns, and my captain died so close his blood reached me on the wind. And we walked on another 2 or 3 eternities, and one day Mr. Ulrin, the caravan master, pointing and shouting from a ridgetop, "Luprise, Luprise!" He's a foul man with piggy eyes, Mr. Ulrin. He's sitting here across the table sucking a mango pit and watching me write, trying not to stare because he fears me. He's not entirely a fool. All I have to do is glance up to scare him off to his room. No, Ulrin's not all bad, though. He leads the caravan now since the night of the jellyfish massacre, and I will say he kept everyone walking despite our acid-burned bodies and broken hearts. That day on the ridgetop he made men wild with his talk. Luprise and its pleasures, wine and lamb shanks and aromatic oils and marble baths and willing whores. All that is true. Luprise is beautiful like the dream of the goddess of music, but it's still an oasis, and we're still 9 days from the desert's edge. Today a parrot flew over me in the blazing sun, and I heard a bubbly hiss, and fuck, but its droppings were there sizzling like bacon in the street. So much for living. I think I'll skip the feeling part, because did you know there are 19 kinds of scorpion in this desert? I saw them dried and pinned on this fucker's wall. Never mind that. I was going to tell you about the bloodstains on this notebook. I can't decide if I'm to blame. There's this huge jackass, the Ursid somebody's bodyguard, who comes in here for palm wine and watches us while he drinks. I never had any problems with him whatsoever. I thought his muscles were impressive for a cheap-ass hired sword. Maybe he tells good jokes or stories, I thought, so today I nodded to him just a soldier's friendly hello. He was surprised, and then he gave me a funny smile. My comrades stopped chewing, looked from me to him, to me again, and jumped up quick with their plates and fled the table. All but Gran and Uncle, who had their backs to the big man and were arguing about the war. So up he slouches close to our table until he's right by Gran's elbow. I'm looking around, lost. I still have no idea in the world. Then, still staring at me, he drops the smile and does something crude and obvious with his tongue. Captain Utarov would have called that an unfortunate decision. And so it was, because my uncle and Gran chose that moment to look up and notice him. Naturally, their eyes snap right back to me, and I just grin and start to loosen up my shoulders. Steady, steady, Uncle warns, and I stand up, but all the big fool sees is a girl who finds him hilarious and won't fuck him this century, so he curls his lips, sneering, and asks, "Which one of them jilted you, eh?" Jilted? I say, 'cause I'm lost again. Which one of them Hingeman brothers? I saw how the light went out of your sassy little eyes when they ran off. Which one were you sweet on? Did he do much for you? Sir, calls our poor addict prince from another table, you are about to experience the most extraordinary discomfiture. Take some well-meant advice and... Bet it was the short one, says the fool. Go on, tell. Did he promise you eternal love if only you'd let him taste before you buy? And then, when he tasted good and proper, he and his brother swan off to whoosh. Gran smacked his arm down on the table and pinned it there with a short knife through his sleeve. And the fool reaches for the knife with his free hand. Whoosh! That's one pinned down too with her spare knife, both arms crossed over the table and his skin not even nicked. You Parthian hag, he manages to shout before Gran catches a fistful of his greasy hair and breaks his nose against the table. Ha ha! I'm up and dancing. This is the best thing since the circus. And then my uncle gives me a look that says, hush. Gran's pressed his elbow sharp and deep into the big man's throat, and he's gone still all the way to his fingertips because he can feel what one more push from her would mean. She says, my granddaughter has had no opportunity to learn non-lethal methods of combat, but in the matter of knives, she has surpassed her instructor. I love her formal voice. It could freeze a man's balls so far up inside him he'd never find him again. And have you guessed, the instructor was her. We send him off with a warning and a clean kerchief from the prince. I'm still dizzy with joy. I'm going to write this, I shout. I'm going to write down exactly what just... My uncle's arms around my grandmother. She waves a hand and kind of snarls. But when she coughs, she sprays her plate in the salt cellar and this notebook with blood. I suppose I'm feeling angry and sad. One night, on my first deployment, my sergeant warned me. He said, You know, the problem is not that we're trapped here and not even that the money's gone and there's talk of moving into the stalls with our camels. What do I care? It's been one crowded sty or another since I was 10 years old. No, that's not why I'm angry. It's because the big fool had a point. You left us here, Condry. Snuck off with your brother, 2 thieves in the night. You two who I was ordered to die protecting if necessary. And do I have to tell you I took that order to heart? And it kind of hurts, like a battle wound. The camel drivers still aren't ready to believe it. They walk up and stare at us like it's a language problem or we're playing a trick. Brother's gone? Yes, brother's gone. Condry and Mektu scurried off like 2 brother rats. Now you may say it was a mercy. There's this little white demon who was coming for you and you only ran to draw her off. But that doesn't excuse the sneaking, does it? Why not say something, bastard? Tell me that. All those looks, all those little chats in the desert, the time we fought the vultures, the time we were drugged and woke up all tangled together, the time we survived the salt blindness, the time you were sick to dying and I fed dates into your mouth. You think I'm just some wounded bitch who fights and curses, but that's not true. I listened to every word you spoke. Your eyes said we were brother and sister. Your voice said, I'm different, girl. Your way of never once trying to touch me said, Talupeke, why don't you trust in my friendship? And then you're gone like the others without even a note. I won't curse you in writing. I won't insult you like you've insulted me. I will find you, though, and you'll explain or you'll be sorry. Let me repeat, Condry Hingeman, I do not like to lose. Thank you.
Thank you. Take a break, have a drink, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Hello. We're going to start the second half. Welcome back to the second half of Fantastic Fiction at KGB, which is always the third Wednesday of every month, in person now, hopefully in perpetuity. Our next wonderful reader, before I announce our next wonderful reader, we have a few people coming up in the next few months. Some are maybe are iffy, but we're getting the schedule set up. December 15th, we have David Leo Rice and N.K. Jemisin. Woo! January 19th, we have P.J. Manny and T.K. February 16th, we have Tochi Onyebuchi. It's Onyebuchi. I remember, I checked it out. Okay. Mercurio and David Rivera. And I don't think we don't have March. We have a few coming up. We have Victor Laval in a few months, and I forget who else is coming. But anyway, our next guest tonight is C.S.E. Cooney, who lives in Queens, New York. And is dressed to the nines, by the way. She won the World Fantasy Award for her collection Bone Swans in 2016, and her new collection, Dark Breakers, comes out from Mythic Delirium in February 2022. And it's a gorgeous, you can look at the books, you can't take them home, but you can look at them, they're beautiful. Her forthcoming novel, Saint Death's Daughter, will be out with Solaris in April 2022. Currently, she and her husband, author Carlos Hernandez, are co-developing a TTRPG, which is a game. I had to look it up. I'm sorry, I'm old.
Negocios Infernales.
I was just going to say, and about Inquisition and Aliens called Negocios Infernales, which I was able to pronounce, which is why I wanted to say it. Anyway, please welcome Claire Cooney.
I don't have books to sell because I only have advanced reading copies, though I will give one away by the end of the night. But I do have delicious and nutritious, if you like fiber, postcards, and on the back are very cunning little QR codes that lead you directly to pre-order pages, including our TTRPG, Negocios Infernales. It's just sort of like the Kickstarter that's like, back this project. You don't have to pay any money. It'll just tell you when it goes up, and you will definitely want it because it is awesome. Dark Breakers is a collection of novellas and stories that all take place in the same world as Desdemona and the Deep, which was my Tor.com novella edited by Ellen Datlow. And I'm not going to read too much from it. I'll just read a couple paragraphs as a teaser a couple paragraphs that Desdemona happens to be in. She's a very tertiary character. She's not a main character in this. But I thought, for anybody who enjoyed that, they might like this. Then I'll read a whole chapter from St. Death's Daughter. Gideon's cousin looked tousled and half asleep when the housekeeper showed him into the breakfast parlor at Breaker House. The pale green and gold of the walls threw their radiance upon her who needed none. Desdemona Mannering was a sun unto herself. That morning she wore a tea gown of peach silk damask with sweeping back pleats and a ruff of ivory lace. Her black hair spilled across her shoulders as carelessly as ink, giving her a siren's aspect. She blinked at Gideon like a gentry cat, too regal and important to be bothered by any such frivolous thing as remembering some mere mortal's name, whether or not they were family. She settled on a surprised, why, cousin, for lack of anything more specific. Gideon rolled his eyes, impatient of her skylarking. Desdemonster. She sipped espresso from her demitasse. To what do I owe this honor? Gideon collapsed into one of the mahogany chairs opposite her. It's not summer anymore. Why are you in your summer cottage? I thought it would be deserted at this time of year, a high, lonely place like this with wind blowing in from the sea. I'm hiding out, she confessed, sipping delicately. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. She had decided to confide in him, or pretend to. Boy troubles. Gideon leaned back, crossing his arms and ankles. Chas Mallister? Desdemona laughed and let her head fall against the posy-broidered cushion of her chair. Those aren't boy troubles. Those are Chas troubles. They're perennial. I don't let them bother me. No, this was more of an instance of one boyfriend finding out about another boyfriend and weeping all over my bosom. Tenors, you know. The only thing Chas does to my boyfriends is steal them. He discovers their particular genius, builds it up like a cathedral, then sends his boys out into the world as powerful, confident men to be famous and insufferable, thereby rendering them useless to me. I like the delicate ones who need me. Oh, she laughed like expensive crystal. Truth be told, I like them all. Teddy bears, wounded comedians, self-effacing ladies in tweed with their pop bottle glasses. And best of the lot, a Cracker Jack reporter in a checkered coat. Dark Breakers, February 2022. Pre-order. You can even get this cunning little card with a beautiful illustration by Brett Massey. But the true heft of 2022 that I'm contributing to literary society is this thing I've been working on for 13 years, and it's coming out. What you have to know, St. Death's Daughter. Miscellaneous Stones is the main character. We'll call her Lainey. It's easier on the tongue. She's born into a family, the Stoneses, who are mostly assassins and sometimes necromancers. A necromancer is very rare, and you can tell they're a necromancer under very specific circumstances. From a very young age, they're allergic to violence. So, say if your father has beheaded someone in your general vicinity, you might start projectile vomiting, hives, rashes, that sort of thing. And you might end up having echo wounds, which is when somebody hurts somebody violently in your vicinity, you have a wound very much like the hurt that's inflicted. So a necromancer rarely survives to adulthood, but when one does, they're so allergic to violence that they can raise the dead. Miscellaneous, Lainey Stones has grown into her power, and many things have happened by this point in the book, but the Blood Royal Aralira, the ruler of the realm, has been murdered, people suspect. And she has been asked by the Blood Royal's second-born child. There's the Blood Prince, who's the heir. The second-born is kind of a priest. You know, like there's the royalty, then there's the clergy. If there were a third child, military, right? So the second-born fire priest, they have asked her to come and raise their mother or part of her to tell them what happened the night of her death. And Lainey has been through a lot in the last several days, but she is like, okay, I'll come do this for you. I guess one piece of vocabulary, if you don't get it, is actenica. And actenica is what happens when dead matter and a necromancer's living blood meets and become the third state, not life or death, but undeath. So actenica is the state of undeath. You might hear that. Chapter 23, Araliera's Last Advice. So they're in a glass garden with a glass casket. Araliera is going to go be incinerated this evening. Her corpse will be incinerated in the triple flame. And then, at last, up went that stifling glass lid, light as a bubble, etched with frosted flowers, up and off the body, granting Lainey access and communion. And then she and Canon Lear were setting the lid down upon the moss gently, and Lainey was stepping in close. She placed her left hand upon Araliera's shoulder, something deep, swimmingly, sweepingly deep at the bottom of her belly relaxed. Her left hand tingled. She heard the deep chiming of bones. The first whiff of citrus teased her nostrils. 3 days ago, just 3 days, Lainey marveled. When I was first preparing for this interrogation, I thought we would begin by discovering what happened to the Blood Royal on the night of her death. We will have her tell her story plainly, without interruption, then ask whatever clarifying questions we deem necessary. And then she gestured to Canon Lear with her free hand. If and when you are satisfied, I will step away, and you may have a word with her alone. For a moment, Canon Lear's bloodshot eyes grew very large and round. Though Lainey had known them since their mutual childhood, Canon Lear had never seemed anything but completely self-possessed to her, their well-educated, sophisticated gravitas defying their years at every age. But now, looking terribly young, terribly lost, they whispered, "What shall I say to her?" Lainey wondered what she would have wanted from Natty or Abba had she been strong enough at age 15 to stabilize their actenica. Had she bound their substance fast to their accident and raised them up and sat them down for an actual honest-to-death God conversation for once in their lives. Afterlives. Too late for her now, but not for Canon Lear. "You could ask her blessing," she suggested, perhaps, risking a grin, beg that she might pass on the whereabouts of any secret caches of treasure she might happen to have left lying about. Canon Lear's mouth twitched. Or perhaps, Lainey added more somberly, she has some final advice for you and your brother, who must now carry on in her wake. The twitch blossomed into a rueful dimple, her not inconsiderable wake. She and they regarded each other, each nodding like two wise flowers in the rain. Then Canon Lear stepped back from the beer and said, "Thank you, Miss Stones. I am ready." So Lainey left Canon Lear to their own internal preparations and gazed down instead at Araliera's accident, sinking her whole consciousness into it. Memories of her time with the Blood Royal rose to the fore. Lainey could not regret never again encountering Araliera's toothy, untrustworthy smile, or avoiding those avid, calculating eyes, or hearing that trained orator's voice lying to her, lying to everyone about everything, all the time. But the longer Lainey looked at her, the more kindly she felt. And this she knew was dangerous, for Lainey did not want to love Araliera, even now, and yet she could not help it. Canon Lear cleared their throats. Lainey brought her attention back up out of the corpse. "Yes? If possible, Miss Stones, I would wish to arrange this conversation in such a way that Araliera's body, or any conspicuous part of it, does not disintegrate in a suspicious manner. If my Omer, the Eparkarana, discovers that their royal sibling has deliquesced into a pile of post-ectenica sludge," they grimaced, "I fear that rumors of necromancy will inevitably follow. And since I have promised to keep your secret safe..." No, I see, good point." Narrow-eyed, clinical, Lainey ducked her head to study the corpse more closely. She sucked her lower lip into her mouth, bit down, released, which gave her an idea. Her tongue, she decided. Memory seated in the tongue will abet ectenical communication anyway, plus it's hidden. She absently patted her trouser pockets for her syringe kit, then picked up her jacket and turned out every nook and cranny of it, only to realize that what she'd sought she'd unhappily left back at Queen Anisil's tomb. She sighed. "Oh well, it's not necessary. It's cleaner and more efficient, but any sharp edge will do." Silently, Canon Lear offered up their misericord. Footnote 17. The fire priests of Sapacor always carried this weapon with them as part of their vestments, though over the centuries its purpose had become more traditional than functional. It used to be that every fire priest was also a bright knight, a warrior who fought to drive the worship of the triple flame into every unbeliever's heart, often forcibly. These days, fire priests were better known for their hedonism and peace-loving ways. And bright knights, at least in Lyriat, were an elite force of priestly bodyguards for the highest-ranking clergy and their noble allies. The blade was slender as an ice pick, with a decorative twist at the base like a small cyclone, a grip of carved ivory, and a creamy cloud-covered pearl in the pommel. Lainey lost no time in nicking the tip of her middle finger and bending over Araliera. A slight, distressed sound across from her brought her glance up again. Canon Lear's face looked sick beneath the remnants of their paint. No, you mustn't worry, Lainey assured them quickly. You keep your misery cord quite keen. I hardly felt a thing. It's nothing. You've seen me bleed before, most copiously. Echo wounds always produce more juice than these incidental prickles, though, they do heal faster. Remember when you loaned me your robe for my nosebleed? I still keep a scrap of that silk by me and a small box of my favorite things. She watched with fascination as a look of delight and warmth returned to Canon Lear's face. Miss Stones, they said, I am moved. Lainey smiled at the tone of that Miss Stones. She suspected Canon Lear of a gallant attempt at flirtation, even though with the greatest will in the world, neither of them was any good at flirting. Still, it spiked the smell of citrus in the air, as well as her confidence, and Lainey thought she'd attempt a flirt herself. Well, it was only a very little scrap, Canon Lear. That's all that was left after my very big nosebleed. The biggest, they murmured. By now, the middle finger of her left hand was singing, ready, 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 and Lainey became all business. Now, if you will, Canon Lear, with all due reverence, open your mother's mouth for me? Thank you. All right, now you might want to look away while I... Yes, that's it. And now I'll just sing her a refrain of the Maranathasath anthem, shall I? Goody Graves taught it to me. An old Quidoni spell song, the first ever uttered, a cry to Doedena against death itself. Of course, I don't know if that's all true, but the song's origin is certainly of unfathomable antiquity. I learned its companion song first, though like you it was born second, the Lanisthanisar, the undreaming, also called the Great Lullaby, for it can sing the undead to sleep again. But the Maranathasath anthem, which I will now attempt, is called the Dream Calling, for it summons the dead back to their dream of life, or so Goody says. All I know is the melody focuses my death magic and adds stability and durability to my Ectenica, and not to mention, oomph. Lainey realized she was babbling, decided not to anymore, and bent to examine the blood spatter on Araliera's tongue for ectenical change. Perhaps the slightest shimmering? It's such a slippery little tune, she muttered, more to herself than to Canon Lear, who bent close to hear her. Like trying to isolate your earliest memory when you're not sure it even happened, but there's no one to corroborate it for you, so you can never be sure. Or like describing a dream, it's never quite the same in your mouth as it was in your mind. Even Goody only recalls the tunes in tatters. I will say that singing the melodies, or rather remembering them, is effortless on a surge day, but oh dear, in ordinary time, let me tell you. But no matter, humming a few notes for you, for Araliera, is my greatest honor. She calmed her nervous babble, channeled it into silence, and the moment she did so, the Ectenica caught. Cold star, snow ember, moon frost, kindled in the mouth of the dead blood royal of Lyriat. The sight of it cooled Lainey's fevered thoughts, focused her mind. She breathed out. Where is breath? In the stillness. What is stillness? Sothane. In the stillness at the end of her breath, just prior to her next inhalation, Lainey tuned into the twittering of her living bones where the music lived. The tale of a trill. She hummed it back, the first 4 notes, then the next 4, then the next 12 notes in all, barely a phrase. But as surely as she was a Stones, that phrase was anthem, was welcome, was wake. Lainey doggedly kept the hum alive on her lips like a bumblebee caught buzzingly between her teeth. Her deep voice sang counter to it, a sound only the dead could hear. Both her voices hummed, her whole body humming along, substance and accident together, until the blood throbbed in her newly cut finger. throbbed too, where it flecked Areliera's mouth, painted her cold tongue. The tongue was now crawling with low blue light, that same spectral glow that illuminated Goody's eyes. It quickened an animated luster that took hold of its accidental fuel until it had lashed the tongue entirely, and then it became the tongue. The Actenica writhed, worm-like, irate in Areliera's mouth, fast flopping in every direction at once, scrabbling and squirming against the corpse's stiff cheeks like feet kicking at a confining blanket. Lainey sucked in air like a swimmer at the plunge, then stuffed her left hand all the way into Areliera's mouth. It stretched for her like obedient putty. She caught the wriggling tongue in her fist, stilled its struggles, and began to pull, stretched it, worked it like luminous blue caramel, shaped it. Soon the thing she held no longer resembled tongue. It hadn't been a tongue since the moment Lainey's blood met with the dead matter. No more flesh but Actenica, at once material and ethereal, dead matter and living blood combining into the third state, undeath. Actenica swam up Lainey's fingers, twisted around her knuckles, her wrists, cold, electric cobwebs, popping and crackling in their eagerness to communicate. Lainey smiled, just as eager, ecstatic to oblige. Areliera Brackenwild, we wish to talk to you. We have questions. Areliera Brackenwild. Carefully, millimeter by millimeter, she released the Actenica back between Areliera's lips, L's and L's of it, a long ribbon of blue light unspooling from her left hand to coil tamely and snugly between the floor of Areliera's mouth and her hard palate, like a snake in a shaft of sunlight. When the Actenica was all in place, Lainey asked it, "Are you ready to talk, Areliera Brackenwild?" "I am ready to talk," the Actenica replied. Lainey glanced up at Canon Lear, whose hands had tightened on the wooden frame of the bier. Their face was stoic, but their body was visibly shaking, from the beaded burls of black hair on their head to the gilded sandals on their feet. But they gave a curt nod, so she began. "Tell us about the night you died." The Actenica's report was pretty much what Lainey had been expecting. Areliera had been reading in bed. A feeling, something like sleep, a lot more like drowning, overcame her. She could not move. Breathing was difficult. A sweet molasses stickiness between her and her next heartbeat. 2 birds flew through the window. A third bird, large and black with red markings, perched on the sill outside. The 2 birds inside the room vanished. In their place, 2 women stood over Areliera's bed. Both of them bore the wizard marks of Rook. The tall one Areliera knew, for they had met before. She would have spoken her name aloud, Branfiacna, but at no time was released from that sensation of slow, squeezing sleep. Branfiacna bent over her bed, whispered, 2 and 20, and blew an iridescent dust from off the palm of her hand into Areliera's face. What followed were hours of agony, or perhaps minutes. The Actenica corrected itself, and then nothing. And now this. Lainey stood back. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, no longer addressing the corpse. Canon Lear nodded without speaking. "Do you have any more questions?" They shook their head. She hesitated, then asked, Would you like a private word with her?" Hesitation, a quick, jerky nod. Lainey stepped away from the bier. "I'll let you say your goodbyes, then." The glassed-in garden was not large, but Canon Lear's voice dropped to a whisper as they knelt beside their mother's bier, putting their head next to the corpse's and greeting it by name. The Actenica returned the greeting. "Lear." Lainey politely plugged her ears with her index fingers, but even that, though it stopped her from accidentally hearing Canon Lear's questions, did not mute Areliera's responses. Despite her best intentions, Lainey could hear every word uttered by the undead. It was a sound she received in her bones, not her ears. Thankfully, Areliera's responses to her second-born were short and soothing. Yes, she loved them. Yes, she was proud of them. Yes, they had her blessing. She was confident they were clever and wily, wise and deep, would do their hard work remorselessly and well. Times boded to be dark and difficult for Lyriat, the Actenica predicted, but it knew that Lear would keep the good of the realm foremost in their mind, as Areliera had not. After a quarter hour of this, Canon Lear bowed their head, said something that Lainey could not make out, thank you perhaps, or goodbye, and laid a kiss upon Araliera's naked knuckles. Lainey started making her way back from the fountain at that point, but Canon Lear was not quite done. They looked up suddenly, their troubled gaze meeting Lainey's. She replied with a tentative smile and jerked her chin at Araliera. This called their attention back to the actenica that had been Araliera's tongue, which was beginning to crumble at the edges. Lainey could almost taste the char. She flashed a 5-finger warning. Canon Lear smiled crookedly, lifted a single finger in response, and turned to their mother's corpse. This time they angled their shoulders so that Lainey could neither see their face nor read their lips, even if she'd wanted to. Bending low over Araliera's body, they whispered something just above its mouth before turning their ear toward its lips to hear the actenica's whispered response. Whatever the question and its answer, they wanted to keep it as private, as secret as possible. But the actenica's response rang throughout Lainey's whole body like the horns that heralded a high holy fire feast. Marry her. I have this copy to give away. But without Googling the answer, you have to tell me your best guess, or if you know, even more power to you, the definition of the word, which is an actual word. And Amy, you were there, so you can't guess. Okay. The word necropants. Neither you, Andrew, you were there too. Necropants. You get pants made out of human skin. And when you put a coin in the dead ball sack, it will produce more money for you, apparently, if the donor was voluntary. I love necropants. It's a footnote in the book. Would you like a copy of this book? It's the advanced reading copy, so there's copy edits still.
That was an amazing reading. And Robert, your reading was amazing too. So we're going to do something a little new. This is only the second month we're doing it. We're going to do a Q&A.
Woo!
So does anyone have questions about anything at all? The nature of the universe, reality.
Life, universe.
Yes.
Medium 42.
Questions. Anybody?
How does anyone come to know the definition of necropancy?
Okay. The question is, how does anyone come to know the definition of necropancy?
It's simply a thing that one knows.
It's a thing that one knows. Yes. That makes as much sense as anything, right? Questions? Yes.
I wonder if you can get it started if Claire and Robert could ask each other one question.
So the question is, can Claire and Robert ask each other questions or one question? We just want to make sure we get it on the mic. You're welcome to come up here and ask each other, but just we want to make sure we record it so that it's on the podcast. Yeah, come on up. Go ahead.
I mean, the trouble is just asking one question, choosing just one, but I guess, Claire, I'd like to ask when and how you came to imagine making death something that could be full of so much love, if that makes sense. Having just finished reading your wonderful, wonderful novel. So.
I have a friend, Sharon Shin. She writes fantasy as well, and she says, she told me once, like, every writer has their thing they write about, and she's like, I read about, like, lost children a lot, and she's romantic too, so she's kind of like waywards and stray. She's saying, you, Cooney, you write about death and what comes after. Like, that's my thing, apparently. And I was like, no, I don't. Shit. And I was like, I'm gonna write something that has nothing to do. Oh, and then like every time I'm like, no, shit, you could. Anyway, I did want something a little not obvious, I guess. We've had a lot of the other kind of necromancer, so it's time to put flowers in their hair and make them joyful and mischievous. And rye, I suppose. It was time, and that's, it was bound to happen sooner or later. The idea came from my friend took me out shooting in the desert once, more than 13 years ago. She's like, you're a writer, you have to know how to shoot a gun. And I was like, okay. So we go and shoot like some, tires in the desert. And I was like, I was supposed to have these noise-canceling earphones on, and whether or not they were working, I don't even know, but it was still too loud. So even before I pulled the trigger, the anticipation of the noise, like I'd break out in a cold sweat, I'd start shaking, even not killing anything. And I was like, whoa, that would be very inconvenient for the child of a family of assassins. And I tried to write it as a sci-fi short story in Phyllis Eisenstein's class, and the butler was like a robot named Graves. There's still a housekeeper who's an undead housekeeper named Goody Graves, but it was like totally has changed since then. That's my answer. Robert, I just want to think of a good one, and part of me, I've read both your first books, and I don't want to I don't want to stress you out about the third one, but stressing. But also I want to know about, are you excited about what comes after? Like, do you have to fight ideas bubbling against the third of a trilogy of a major work, like thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of words? Or are you, does it keep you going? Does it feed your battery?
Remember how to drop it. You have to live with it.
I'm trying to figure out an honest way to answer. I mean, I'm very, very, very determined to finish the story in book 3 because, I had a first series that was supposed to be this little kind of a breather before another project, and I was going to write like a 250-page book and be done, and it turned out to be like 1,900 pages of story and people asking for a book 5 eventually. So it's going to absolutely end, and I have been, from an early age, dreaming about writing a really good siege story. And, so I'm setting myself this attempt to write the siege story to end all siege stories, at least to set the bar high, I guess. But yeah, I'm very, very, I'm energized. I got really tired I was exhausted by book 2. And so I've let myself kind of move in slowly with book 3, and I've written like 7 beginnings, and what I read tonight was just one of them. I hope that after, maybe I've spent like 30% of the complete effort of the book on the first 50 pages. I hope that's true, so that I'll actually pick up speed now. Maybe that answers your question.
Woo!
I have a question for both of you. So, both of you have written, obviously, works that reference other works you've written, right? So in the same world, so to speak. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I'm saying both of you have written works that take place in previous worlds that you've written. As those worlds expand, do you find it difficult to keep track of all the events and happenstance and proper nouns that happen during that? As someone who is writing something long myself, I find that I have to have copious notes to keep track of all that stuff. So I'm just curious for if each of you can answer that. Yeah, go ahead.
I can answer that because I have a really simple answer, and it's kind of scary, but no, I have no trouble at all. Ask me what I was doing 2 hours ago, and you'll get a blank look. And that is a problem, interfacing with reality. So no, it's clearly a big chunk of the brain is just around for that, because it doesn't seem to fade very much. Whereas, normal life is a lot harder.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's true.
How about you, Claire?
So for like the Dark Breakers, Desdemona in the Deep was the third movement I wrote, but it was I wrote it to stand alone, and I'm like, all right, so what can go? What of the world can go and what can stay so that it can be its own thing? And so when I went back and revised the first two movements, I wanted to make them stand up to Desdemona. So I tried to make them stand alone. So mostly the references to the other stories are more like jokes. I mean, but I do have to like reread, and I have some notes. Some I can keep in my head, but some of them are just more like, I'm going to refer to the events of this story that I wrote 10 years ago as though it had been made into a movie in the 100 years since then. And so what people know about that story is the movie that was made, not necessarily the events themselves, which I wrote. So it's like there's a way to like, oh, it's a piece of theater now. Oh, it's an opera. Oh, it's an epic poem. So there's like a way to sort of jokingly do it. Plus, when you're dealing, at least with Desdemona and Dark Breakers, there's the matter of who's the narrator, are they trustworthy, were they enchanted or drunk at the time, so that's easy. With Saint Death's Daughter, it's the first of a trilogy, and there are some jokes for somebody who's been reading my work from the beginning. The only person I think is like my mother and maybe Rich Horton would get some of those jokes because they're like one-liners in an 800-page book. But I think the real challenge with this one will be if it comes to a book 2 and 3, which I'm planning, but I'm not contracted for, will be the challenge of keeping all of the world building in my head. I have a Miscellaneous Stones trilogy notes folder, but it's like every single draft's worth of notes, so some are not, they don't even count anymore. The calendar particularly is going to be really tricky, but I enjoy it. I don't know, I think I like that challenge, but it's not easy.
So I kind of love the idea of the idea that when someone's reiterating a story, it's not exactly the story that you heard. It's a little bit different, and maybe someone's telling it differently or remembering it differently. I think that's closer to reality, at least for me. Any questions from the audience? Any more? Yeah, go ahead.
I apologize. I missed your name. I came in a little late.
Claire
Cooney, C.S.E. Cooney.
Could you talk a little bit more about your tabletop RPG?
Yeah, thank you.
So the question is for Claire to talk more about her tabletop RPG.
I'll keep it brief.
I'm just going to reiterate it for the podcast.
The tabletop RPG is called Negocios Infernales. It is a collaborative storytelling game that my husband Carlos and I have been designing together for the past 2 years. It's sort of like an alternate world Spain of Queen Isabella, but right before their version of the Inquisition. Aliens are like, oh no you don't, and intervene, and they offer a bargain with their queen, Reina Resoluta, the resolute queen. They're like, look, we'll give you, we want to trade you. We want you to be part of the cosmic consciousness. We'll do anything to prevent this terrible inquisition that's about to happen. And the queen is like, oh, are you devils? And they're like, no, we're your benefactors. And they're like, will you give us uncanny powers in exchange for our immortal souls? And the aliens are like, sure, close enough. We'll work with your metaphor. So it's a kind of a game of narrative irony wherein the players have perfect information, but the characters don't. The characters think they've sold their immortal souls to become wizards. And the aliens are just like, dudes, we just want you to join the cosmic consciousness and not kill each other. So it takes you through character creation, world building. There's 7 bespoke module plots that are different genres, like mystery, gothic, kind of Enchanted Isle, Alice in Wonderlandy, kaiju. So there's like that, and instead of dice, there's a bespoke deck. We've created 70 cards, almost like an oracle deck, 7 suits. They're very kind of weird and spooky, and they always work, and it's weirdly eerie. Even though we made it all up, we're like, why does that work? We don't know. So it's very exciting. It's being published by Outland Entertainment. It will kickstart sometime next year. We're stupid excited about it, and I encourage you to pick this up, and you'll get more information with a QR code on the back.
Awesome. It's really fun.
Anyone else? Any questions? Yes, Amy.
See, your description of it raises another question for me, Claire. Because now what I'm wondering is if there is no Inquisition, then maybe the Jews don't get kicked out of Spain. How do you account for the equivalent of that in your game?
So Amy
As a Jewish
asks,
person,
if
I
there's no
think-
Inquisition and the Jews don't get kicked out of Spain, how do you account for that?
Cool.
All right, let's do it.
This has an answer, sort of. Because we've had playtesters like Sam Schreiber and Danielle Shaped Object have been like playtesters, and Sam Schreiber particularly, when he was creating his wizard, created his wizard to be part of these people who had been about to be kicked out of Spain, or like the Espada, which is the equivalent. And so his wizard was actively subverting, like using his magic against the queen in secret. And so like you suddenly get a lot of power from a cosmic force. You don't necessarily have to kowtow anymore to the person who was about to slaughter your people. So that's been really interesting to like kind of, we've not play tested with everybody or like the 10,000 people we hope will play test or play it eventually, but I'm hoping they'll build many kinds of narratives that will be vastly different and interesting. But that's like, I hope that that's what happens.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? Any more questions?
I have a question for both.
Yeah, Carlos, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, for each writer, what is a gift that you wrote in the book for yourself?
Okay, Carlos asks, what is the gift in your book that you wrote for yourself? Let's go, Robert.
Well, it's a hard one.
You come up here so we can get you on the mic.
You can do it!
That's a really hard question. A gift that I wrote for myself. I mean, honestly, I feel like when I decided to make time in my life, you know, big chunk of time in my life to tell stories, I was giving myself a gift then, you know, and I mean, there are Easter eggs in there that only like the 4 or 5 people in the entire world would ever get, like the names of dogs that are the same names of dogs that I had when I was a little kid or something like that. I don't know if that quite captures what you mean, but it may not be a direct answer to your question, but it certainly, I think I hear in the sort of the spirit of your question that it's intensely important to me that I always feel it as a very, very personal thing. You know, you probably relate, Claire, right? That there's, if you know, you want to reach lots and lots and lots of people, but the lovely thing about fiction is the more it matters to you in some sort of idiosyncratic, complex, private way, I think the better chance you have of making it universal, which is wonderful, strange, counterintuitive alchemy in a way. So all of it for me, you know, I know, you know, Toni Morrison said that line I always botch, but she basically said I had to write Beloved to write the book I couldn't find out there that I had to read. And there's always that feeling in there for me that that's part of what's going on, so that it's, you know, it's the thing I do each morning that I'm never regretting doing. So it's always a gift to myself, I guess. And that's all.
Okay, there's a scene. I really like the quiet scenes that aren't action-packed or even plot-bearing, which mostly are the scenes that get cut out, right? But I wish they didn't have to. But there's a scene I was like, I have to keep it one way or another, where there's this group of women friends. Lainey's obviously about to like get into some shenanigans with her lover for the first time, and they're all like, prophylactics. Let's talk prophylactics in fantasy fiction. So a lot of research went into like oiled paper and silk and like, you know, guts and things like that. And I was like, they just have to be this conversation about, quote, bonnets and veils that is just like totally honest and it's not necessary, but I wanted it in there. You know, like no magical preventative, but something you have to think about as a female protagonist in a fantasy novel. I kept that for myself.
Okay, just real quick, what should we look for in stuff that's coming out from both of you?
Darkbreakers and Saint Death's Daughter.
Darkbreakers and Saint Death's Daughter, and Robert?
Coming out, well, like
a year and a half, 2 years from now, book 3, Siege.
The short
All
story
right.
that you just said that.
Book
Well,
3,
you know,
Siege.
Anthology, yet to be named by from Julie Day. I've got a short story.
Julie C. Day. Oh,
Julie
awesome.
C. Day.
Yes. Great editor, great writer. Yes. So I think that's it for tonight. So thank you so much for joining us for our second in-person Fantastic Fiction since, we went on a hiatus. This was really, really fun. I hope you'll join us next month for David Leo Rice and N.K. Jemisin. So yes, please join us. Thank you to Claire. Thank you to Robert. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the bartender. Thank you to KGB Bar. Come back next week. We'll see you soon.
You have been listening to the Fantastic Fiction at KGB reading series. Check out our website at kgbfantasticfiction.org and click on support if you'd like to help keep the series going. Anyway, that's our show. Thanks for listening and see you next month.